Here we go now.
Good evening. Thank you for joining. My name is Rabbi Lynn. Welcome to The Lynn Show, Season 3, Episode 5. After we've figuratively traveled to South Africa, Argentina, Germany, and France, tonight we are having a conversation with our brothers in arms, arms like Jewish arms, locking arms in the United Kingdom. So we're excited to have the conversation and learn about Jewish life in the UK. I'm very personally invested in this, of course, because I married it. So my wife is from a small town in the south called Bournemouth, and family lives in much of the family lives in London today. And when we got married, we moved to Cambridge, of all places, because my mother-in-law refused to allow her daughter to be married to an American. She pretty much refused to allow her daughter to be married to an American. But I somehow managed to cajole my way into her good favor after 22 years of marriage, I hope. But we moved. She was not ready to let her give up her degree that she was in the midst of. So we promptly moved to Cambridge after the wedding and ended up spending a few years in London, where I developed a very deep love of what they call football and for all things British, and had an amazing few years there. And then we have been back, of course, all the time. So I feel very, very personally connected to the UK. And so I'm excited to have the conversation tonight. I'm on more familiar territory than I was with some of the other conversations. Okay, so we're post-Purim and we're pre-Pesach, and we've got a lot of great things in the mix to discuss tonight. COVID and the history of Jews in England, Jewish community, England life, and dating and work and all these opportunities. We've got two great guests with us tonight. Of course, you can have hundreds and hundreds of each place, but we got people who are very involved in our Olami organizations, and they're going to join us tonight. We're looking forward to speaking with them. But first, let's give a little bit of the news of the Jews in the United Kingdom. Okay, yeah. So the Jews go all the way back. History of the Jews goes all the way back to the time of William the Conqueror in the 1000s. Likely there were Jews there in the Roman period, but what we know is the first record is in the year 1070. There was the expulsion of the Jews in the year 1290 by King Edward I. It was an official edict of expulsion. So what happened in those almost 300 years? A lot happened, and a lot of it wasn't so great, including massacres in York and famous massacres at York Castle. There's even a tradition in the Jewish people that you will not be allowed to spend the night in York, okay, because of what happened there. And I recently gave it Today in History, I think last month or so. You can find it somewhere. It's a podcast, Today in Jewish History, or somewhere on our Instagram, something about the massacre in Norfolk and the blood libels that were there. Of course, massacres in London and the Black Plague and how we were blamed for all these things, right? It's a very, very difficult history, but we were finally kicked out good riddance in 1290. Only to be let back in many years later under the leadership of Oliver Cromwell. There was a Jew named Menashe ben Israel, who was Dutch, and who basically made a very good economic case why England should allow the Jews back in. And so they kind of trickled in and snuck over the border, but it was officially ratified 5-6 years later, 1655, that the Jews were permitted. There was a ratification treaty in 1743, which was met with huge opposition. And so the history of England is an interesting one. You know, we live there so comfortably, and you don't realize you've been kicked out, okay, and earned your stay. There are today at present about 275,000 Jews in the UK, which interesting, you know, I live in Philadelphia myself. There are 350,000 Jews in Greater Philadelphia. So it's actually a small population, but very strong, very connected. 260 of them are actually in England itself, as opposed to Great Britain. And in London, there's 160,000 of those Jews. In London, it's the fifth largest population worldwide, and it's really an amazing place. Having lived there in the Jewish community, been very involved for 2 years myself. Okay, so that's a little bit of the history of the Jews in England. Now, I want to introduce us to our guests. We have two guests tonight. The first is Denis Meyer. He's 30 years old, and he grew up actually in Germany. and he's moved to the UK in 2008 for his degree and graduated there and has stayed there in medicine, living in London, and he's completing his training only now as a general practitioner, family medicine. There's Denis Mayer. We'll have him live in a moment, lives in West London, and he's gotten very involved in his Jewish identity and heritage through our sister organization, the JLE in London there. So we're looking forward to having him on the show. And joining him will be Mark Tomlinson, who is, yes, born, bred, and raised in England, Manchester of all places, and so we'll learn about that in the Manchester community. And he has a very interesting profession for a nice Jewish boy. He's a pilot, which you don't hear much of. So we're looking forward to getting those conversations underway. And without further ado, let's bring them on the show. Hello, Denis. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. Hi.
Okay, great. Thank you guys so much for joining and for coming on and for representing. You're representing, Mark, you're single-handedly representing the born, bred, and raised British Jewry. Okay, since the reinstitution of the Jewish community in 1656, you're the guy. And Denis, of course, is that strong expat. We could do a lot in England together, even though we weren't born here. And so looking for the conversation. Denis, tell me a little bit about, just personally, obviously German is your mother tongue. Your English, you've done a fine job with it. But give me a little bit what it's like just for you, uniquely having come there, and why you decided to stay.
So my mother tongue is actually Russian, because my parents are from Ukraine. But I ended up in the UK because I went to an international school. So my education has always been in English, even back home in Germany. So a lot of us ended up going to UK or US. I chose the UK for medicine. So, and I'm still here now.
And being married to an English woman, and having lived there myself, and how do you deal with the innate disdain that the English have for the Germans? I mean, you can just only, you can't get. How do you deal with that?
I guess I haven't really been exposed to it because in university, lots of international people, so they don't have any kind of standard British impressions of people abroad. And here in London, it's very international as well. So I've not really had
back a generation. I personally myself I remember living there, and you speak to the people, who are much of the previous generation. It's just there. It's just built in. The French and the Germans, they can't suffer them at all, right? Okay, good. So we'll talk about that existential crisis that you're meant to have, but you don't. Okay, a little bit. And Mark, thank you for joining us. Obviously, I think the question that anyone wants to ask is like, how's a nice Jewish boy end up a pilot? That's so great.
Yeah, definitely. That's the sort of question I get quite a lot. I've met about 3 or 4 in my 4 years flying. Although, funnily enough, I actually live with one, a good friend of mine from Manchester. We now both live together in northwest London, work for the same company, and fly out of the same base, which is Luton Airport. So we do exist, but yes, in quite tiny numbers.
Yeah, I mean, do you have stats on this? When was the first Jewish pilot in the UK? There must be stats on this stuff. If you're a sports fan, how many Jews played in the Premier League? How many? You can count on one hand.
Yeah, that's true. I guess I don't really log the numbers for this sort of thing, but it'd be an interesting survey. But yeah, like I say, there's even in my whole company, I think there's maybe 10 or so, and there's about 4,000 pilots. So yes, definitely a minority.
There are 10.
Sorry?
I'm shocked there are 10.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. We get around, but it can be quite a funny experience, and I have flown with these Jewish pilots, and it's quite a non-Jewish world. Then you'll find yourself discussing where to find the best kosher food in London up at 38,000 feet, and that's always quite special.
Sure. I would say that first picture we saw was not, anyone shouldn't get the wrong impression. The sun was shining very strongly and the mountain was gorgeous. That was Gibraltar. That was not Manchester.
I was very much not the UK. Yes, so I don't want to mislead anybody exactly. Yeah, that's many miles away from the UK. But yes. Gibraltar's quite nice to fly to when the weather's kind. So we took that photo.
It's a British territory. It's a British territory. So we'll give you.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Anyway, thanks guys for joining us. So we're talking about 3 things here. We're going to talk about a little bit about life with COVID. and then Jewish community in the UK, and then personal, like young professional life there, business wise and social life, and just where the young Jewish professional world is there. Okay, so let's jump right in. Denis, being that you're the, I'm sure Mark is trained in first aid. I know that. But since you're the actual, maybe okay, you're the medical student.
The expert. No, we'll see to the expert on this one, obviously.
So we want to know, us Americans want to know why do you guys have a different strain of COVID, and what are you doing to make sure it doesn't reach our shores? That's what we want to know. But first, just give me a little bit of a background. You got to answer that question though. But a little bit of background is to it's been a heavy lockdown. In the beginning in England, COVID was like, you guys were radical. We're keeping everything open. We're going for herd immunity. And that was Boris Johnson's approach, and that didn't work so well. And you guys got walloped. And then there's been a pretty major lockdown for a while. And now you have a whole new strain of COVID that's driving everyone getting everyone a little nervous.
Yes, I guess unfortunately the whole world is dealing with uncertainty, and every country is trying to create their own best strategies. The UK is as divided probably as every other country in terms of internal different groups of people, economy.
Is it on political lines also? Is somehow everyone's medical assessment also tied to their politics like in America?
Yeah. I mean, this country has been very divided over the last year, whether it's politically or medically, what is appropriate to do, what is not appropriate to do. Do we focus on economy? Do we focus on public health? Nobody knows what the right thing is to do anyway. So I guess a lot of it has been trial and error. So the first lockdown was more difficult because that was just a complete lockdown with us not really knowing what we're dealing with. Luckily, the subsequent lockdown now, at least, there is a bit more certainty. The vaccination program is rolling out, so I just got mine today as well. So at least we're starting to see some improvement in terms of the data from Israel that's coming out.
Right. Just so people know that in the UK, the vaccine rollout, they're getting very good numbers compared to all the other European countries in terms of numbers of vaccinations. But they have a certain approach, which is really to vaccinate give everyone the first shot. Everyone you can give them, right? Am I correct? Give them the first shot.
Yes. So I guess the Pfizer data said we could have done first dose and then 3 weeks later, second dose. The UK has decided to leave 3 months instead of 3 weeks in between, which initially was very disputed.
Yeah, my in-laws are very upset about that.
But it seems like actually it is working, because now there's Israeli data saying that the first vaccine is actually sufficient to boost the kind of reduction in severity. And so it is actually working potentially. So we are probably the best in Europe at the moment.
Okay, good. We are desperate to see our family over there. So the sooner they can get to us, we can get to them, we'll be happy. Mark, I mean, you talk about a career that's been hit by COVID. Either it's a pub or it's a pilot, right? So what's it been like for what's your perspective from your 30,000 foot, perspective on COVID as a pilot?
Yeah, I think definitely along with hospitality, aviation has just been totally decimated. We're currently flying 10%, if that, of the usual schedule. And yeah, it's been crazy. Initially it was just mandated for passengers and crew to wear the masks, and then they started cancelling flights, and then we started seeing flights with maybe 5 or 6 people on board. I remember flying to Tel Aviv actually a few months ago when they were still allowing flights, and we had 7 people. So this is 7 passengers on a plane built for 180. And yeah, it's crazy. So I myself haven't flown.
When EasyJet has flights, when EasyJet has flights to Tel Aviv, do they pick the Jewish pilots to fly the plane? Is there any kind of conversation like that?
You think we'd be best placed to deal with all the chutzpah that obviously we encounter on board, but no, it's totally random. But I tend to do normally maybe one every other month. It's always quite special.
I think we're not pilots on the flight to Tel Aviv just to limit the bad PR we get from the chutzpah.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. It's you do feel bad for the cabin crew when they come across. So
I do remember one time I was flying. I can't remember where I was flying to, but I had a connecting flight from El Al to Lufthansa, to connect in Paris, whatever, to Lufthansa, something like that. And like the discrepancy between the waiting areas between the El Al place where people are screaming, throwing food, handing their babies to the stewards. The pilots getting involved, breaking up marriage problem issue, like the deafening cacophony coming from El Al. And then you go to Lufthansa, and it was so pleasant because you could hear a pin drop, and everyone said please and thank you, bitte and danke. Like it was a totally different experience. You could hear the newspaper ruffle in the aisles, to the plane.
Yeah, very much so.
So let's what?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, good. They I think the tagline for El Al is "Achim b'bayit b'olam." You should feel it the most at home feeling in the world. It definitely feels you at home over there.
Yes, I think you should get somewhere in between.
So, and what is it? Are people like? What about work and everything? Employment is the government subsidizing the aviation industry? How's it working there?
Yeah, so we have benefited from the furlough scheme, as they call it, as have people in lots of industries, whereby the government pays a certain percentage of our salary. Within our company in particular, we've been lucky not to suffer any job cuts, but we've most of us agreed to take on part-time contracts to avoid the need for cuts. So until things pick up, we won't be flying. We're not rostered, as it's known. We're not scheduled to fly as much as usual. I personally fly now 2 weeks on, and then I have 2 weeks off, and it'll be the case now well into the summer. So at least it means we still have a job.
And in the beginning, the thought was that flying was super dangerous for COVID exposure, and then the rumor has been it's actually much safer. How can you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of that was sort of hysteria, and it makes good press headlines when they say that the aircraft are sort of hubs for viruses and for spreading bacteria, but actually, the air is filtered many times over and then ejected overboard. So you're no more likely to catch it on the plane than you are, standing next to somebody at a bus stop or in a bus, I would argue. And we haven't heard many cases of passengers coming down with the viruses on our flights anyway, because it's then reported back to the crew that were operating that flight. And since this virus became an issue, at least for us in March, I haven't received a single email saying that I may have been in contact with a passenger who had the virus.
Is Gibraltar open for travel for Brits?
I'm not actually sure. I doubt it, to be honest. I do have friends who are currently stuck over there, Gibraltarian friends who live in London, who are having trouble getting back. And I know from Luton Airport, which is my base, we're not operating any flights there at the present time.
Denis, one question for you. Can you tell us about this new strand? Give us some insights, because you're working on the front line. You're a medical student, but you're working?
No, I'm not a medical student. I'm done with medical school 5 years ago, but I'm completing my
residency
specialty training. I don't know what the equivalent in
the US. We call residency. What's your focus? Family medicine?
Family medicine. So I have not actually been in a hospital since February of last year.
Okay.
So I kind of dealt with the community aspect rather than the secondary care within hospital in the acute setting.
And what's with this new strain?
Well, we don't know. I guess the reaction is always to just shut off borders, which is what is happening. And with time, we'll see whether the vaccines are kind of helping to cover against all the different strains, which in theory they should, because they're all code for the same protein, and the variants shouldn't really hence be affected. But otherwise, we'll have to wait and see. I guess at the moment, we're still in full lockdown, and I guess it'll still be like this for a few weeks until we get further data.
Right. So let's talk about the broader Jewish community in the UK. We know not too long ago we had in pre-elections with Corbyn, he brought a lot of very powerful sentiments to the surface, and I know that the Jewish community rallied in a pretty remarkable way. Actually, I remember my brother-in-law; they was telling me what they were doing. Pretty remarkable way for the Jews to kind of come together and really say, "Listen, we got to put our foot down." If there's someone who has such overt anti-Semitic leanings, it was a unifying experience. Mark, can you let's start with you a little bit. Talk to us about that particular episode, what you felt it was like in British Jewry. Did you feel it was like it was a more dramatic a moment that you've experienced before?
Yeah, I mean, I know personally I tend not to be swayed too much by, doomsaying when it comes to the political scene. But I think with Corbyn, it was different. And even I started thinking, this is quite worrying if somebody like Corbyn ends up in power. You start thinking about you know, I don't know, making Aliyah or just leaving the country to somewhere else in Europe. But I think speaking to most of my Jewish friends, regardless of our sort of political differences, I didn't meet anybody who was, you know, even thinking of voting for him. And it was quite a scary time, but there was a sense that the community was coming together in that respect to come out and make sure that it didn't end up in Downing Street in power. Unfortunately, that didn't happen.
You're basically like, you're the kind of friend you want to have when things go bad because you can fly a jet. If you need to get out, you're the best friend to have.
If people don't mind paying a bit for the gas money, then yes, I'll take them wherever they
We'll
want.
deal with the finances afterwards. Okay, let's get out of the country first.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, even before that, like, you know, when French Jewry was really almost piling out in droves, how have you felt recently that the state of the Jewish community in the UK has been, you know, faring? It's dealing with a different level than we have in America. You know, it was Corbyn just a result of what the pre-existing fanning of flames was already in existence then?
Yeah, I think I think those sentiments have always been there, sort of bubbling under the surface. And the issue with Corbyn is that he gave those sort of feelings a sense of legitimacy. You know, people thought, here's somebody at the top of politics, and he doesn't hate Jews. He just has been misinterpreted and things like this, which is very worrying. And, you know, he was appealing to huge swathes of the population, such as students, with promises of, you know, no student debt and things like that, and who wouldn't in their right mind support that sort of thing. I don't think many people who did vote for him were aware of the other baggage that he was bringing with him. But as far as my experience now in London, maybe it's a bit of a bubble living in northwest London, but
Sure.
I have found it fairly good as far as, you know, anti-Semitic incidents. I personally haven't experienced one in a long time, and I find that you might just read about it in the local Jewish press. But in general, I think England's quite a safe place for the Jews at the moment.
I will say, when I was living there, I used to have, I walk around with a big yarmulke on and like a black hat on Shabbat, you know, things like that. I had plenty of them, even in Northwest London, you know. Yeah. And Denis, so for you, first of all, like what's you know, personally, obviously you're not natively British. Is there anything unique to your experience living in the UK, in the Jewish community there?
Definitely, because back home in Germany, when I was growing up, it was very secular. My parents are Soviet Jews, kind of religion wasn't a big part of growing up. So I have been able to embrace the Judaism and learn about Judaism through JLE. And it has been an incredible last 5 years now of kind of discovering a new part of me and my heritage, which has actually been an important part of who I am now.
Sure. And is there do you find that there are a lot of non-native British Jews in the community that you're in?
Yes, definitely. So London is very international, and I sometimes pick and choose where I go for different Shabbats, because you have kind of the South Kensington, Belgravia area where you have French and Russian. So if I feel like kind of mingling with Russian people, then I go there for a Shabbat. If I feel like doing more learning, I'll go to JLE. So where you have people from Australia, South Africa, France, everywhere around the world. So it's a very international and diverse community here, which is very nice for me as an international single person to be able to get involved in.
Is there a feeling? So, Mark, you live in Manchester, and Denis, you're in London. Is there a feeling? Because it's really amazing to me always. Like I told you, like in the introduction, I said there are 325,000 Jews in Greater Philadelphia, where I live. Right, and there's one city in America. There's significantly more than there is in the entire UK. Do you feel a sense of unity? Some of the other things we've spoken to, especially from South America and in France, that everyone feels like they know everybody else and they're in it together, and the walls are big around them, and there's a real sense of unity and tightness and camaraderie. I don't remember feeling that when I lived in London, but I was only there for 2 years. Do you feel like the whole Jewish community in the UK is really kind of in one camp together, or is it, you know, because in America we don't feel that at all, you know? But what is that experience like? Mark, you can answer that first.
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, whenever you say go to a Jewish event and you meet somebody, you inevitably play Jewish geography, as we call it. and it's very, very likely that you will either know one of their friends or one of their family members, or you went on some summer camp together. But the population, I mean, obviously it's small compared to US standards, but it's still big enough such that you may be familiar with your group, but I'm aware there's many thousands of Jews in London who I've never met and have never crossed paths with. So yeah, I suppose were you to meet them, you feel like you have a lot in common, but there are so many Jewish organizations in London, in Manchester, and as Denis was saying, people get together, they mix with different groups. I feel like there's always new people to meet, and it's not maybe quite one big family in the way that you just described.
Right. Denis, you have to add to that?
Yeah, so coming kind of from the outside and having joined the London Jewry, initially it seems very cliquey because it does seem like everybody knows each other growing up. It is a very kind of North London bubble. Everyone goes to the same school, to the same universities, and they come back home, similar jobs. So coming from the outside, you do notice that there is kind of that tightness, if you want, but it's just they've all kind of grown up together and haven't really left the geography as much. But then you also have the people who come to London from abroad, which then kind of add that diversity. And then when you start going to all the different young professional events, you do realize it's the same people everywhere.
Right.
So it does feel like a family.
Right. I personally also found like it felt some reason I assumed it was bigger than it was, because it does have a breadth to it. It's a large, Jewish community around the country, and there is that feeling of largesse to it. On the other hand, in the pockets it feels very tight knit and very close. Unique to the UK, I think, Jewish experience. The last segment, I just want to talk. Let's talk about like young professional life out there. Okay, in the UK during COVID, like I'm now that you guys are married, yet I'm assuming, right assumption, right? Okay, good. So like, what's the dating life there like, Mark? Like, I guess it's easy for you to date someone international. You just fly to pick them up for for a date.
Yeah.
Like what's the scene like there? How are people getting by in this horrible pandemic?
I mean, general event wise, I think a lot of the Jewish organizations like the JLE have done quite well moving everything onto the online platform. So they still have speakers and that sort of thing, but it's all done via Zoom. And only last week, actually, they had Natan Sharansky and one of the Chilean miners who was rescued from the cave that collapsed a few years ago. That was very interesting. But then, of course, you've lost all the Friday nights and the face-to-face contact that you otherwise would have had. As far as meeting new people, of course, there's J-Swipe. And you might arrange to go for a walk with somebody because, at least at the moment in the UK, there's not much else to do. You can't even go for a coffee, everywhere is closed. Right. So you have to make a bit more effort. And I suppose those people who weren't so keen on the online things, like myself, had to come round to the idea just because at the moment there's no other option.
Do you find that people are focusing, being able to prioritize at least more now their personal lives, their dating lives, and their professional lives before?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, people talk now about, having sort of reassessed what's important to them and whatnot. But I suppose for those working from home, they do now have more time and capacity to devote to building some sort of online relationship potentially with somebody. I mean, I myself, I can't work from home, obviously. So I have no excuse and therefore have plenty of free time.
Can't you fly drones from the house?
I could, I suppose, to keep my eye and to keep my skills up. But no, I've yet to try that.
They send you like flight simulators to keep your instincts good.
Yeah, well, actually, we have to go into the sim every few months anyway, just for our licenses. So I did a real life thing down in Gatwick Airport in South London a few weeks ago, and this is the whole singing and dancing moving box basically. So I'm simming for the time being.
They're gonna have like Jewish wedding simulators soon. You can pretend like you're.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And how did you just since you never know, you might get a message from someone from one of the other countries or America, something like that, interested in you personally. Like, how did you get into piloting?
It's just something I always wanted to do. From when I was 5 or 6. Right. I have old drawings that I made as a kid, or where I wrote saying that I wanted to be an airline pilot. And then I did get a sort of office-based job here in London a few years ago after graduating. It really wasn't a bad job. It was a buyer for a large international supermarket chain. But I think that pushed me to sort of chase the dream of flying, so to speak, bit of a cliche. But that's what I did. And then after training, I secured a job with EasyJet, which is a big European short-haul operation, a bit like Southwest or JetBlue in the States. And I spent 2 years up in Edinburgh in sunny Scotland once I finished training. And then I requested a transfer down to somewhat warmer London.
Yeah, you should know, by the way, when my wife and I got engaged, Monarch Airlines was still a charter airline. And so we flew it from Tel Aviv to I guess it was Luton probably, or Stansted. And we got on the thing, and they looked like bumblebees. They had really funny uniforms, and they were real Mancunians. And I literally could not understand a word she was saying to me. My wife was cracking up and had to translate English to English.
Right. I mean, you know, if I put on a northern accent like this, but I try and sound a bit more sophisticated when I'm on these sort of shows. So this is my normal accent. It was the model of the South.
We thank you for translating it for us. But it's a rough one. Those Manchester accent. My wife's, I think, great uncle was a pilot in the RAF, and he was shot down, but it was over Sweden, so it was neutral.
Okay.
War, and he was put in a camp, internment camp for whatever international soldiers and they kept feeding them lox, and all the non-Jewish British soldiers thought it was horrible, but he, being the one Jewish guy, was like, this is fantastic.
Yeah, he was in a element, just missing a bagel.
Right. Denis, how about in London? What's the Jewish scene like? Are people getting out at all? Are people making efforts to meet each other? What's going on down there?
No, I guess unfortunately it is, as Mark said, everything has moved to online. So I have not actually been able to join a lot of things because of work. And when you come home, you don't want to sit in front of screens anymore. And it's kind of not the same, because there is no kind of being able to mingle and chat to people. It's kind of just listening to the speaker rather than kind of the associated social fun that you have around in events. So it's been quite difficult socially and more or less non-existent, especially going to work every day.
I mean, it sounds like, we should all get Mark together on an EasyJet, and I don't know if EasyJet has enough fuel to get us to petrol, to get us to Buenos Aires. But down there, they're rocking out. Everything's open, bars open, restaurants open. Those girls are having the best time on that show. It's like England, dreary as always, lockdown, cold, wet, snowing. It's even snowing in England these days. Yeah. And so listen, it's first of all, it's very nice to meet you two. I really am glad you came on the show. Really appreciate your time and your insights. And we're here before Passover. Purim was I don't know what it was like, there in London, but we're on the heels. We're on the verge of the Passover holiday, and cleaning out the homes and cleaning ourselves out. And I'm sure there's a metaphor in all of this, of course, trying to, as we try and rid the world of a pandemic, so there's a pandemic that's always in all of us, our egos and our all the bad qualities that plague us, as we call it in the poetic, right? We're plagued by these things. And we're trying to rid ourselves of them the homes of them metaphorically, and ourselves of them in a real way, and trying to clean up our acts. And I guess Pesach, matzah is a good vaccination, like a deep dive into the basics of what life is about, what it means to be a Jew. And we hope that builds antibodies to the forces that try and pull us away from that identity, and that first respond, that knee-jerk reaction of identity that I am a Jew and that's who I am. There are a lot of things in the world that come at us in that regard. And we hope that Pesach this year, I remember last year was really in the height of the beginning of this pandemic was really wild. I can't say I'm looking forward to the perspective, because who wanted the pandemic? But now that we have a year behind us, a little bit of this hindsight and the perspective of what the world's turned into over the course of a year, and what we're able to actually comprehend now and realize and become wiser for it. That's this year's job over Pesach, is to really internalize it. We hope on the other side, just like we came out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, right? And we remember the bitterness of the time there. We remember the bitterness of this year and the pandemic and the difficulties that's presented. But we hope to turn the lemons into lemonade, turn the darkness into some light, and turn it into some deep understandings and appreciations of who we are as a people, of life itself. And I'm wishing both of you and everyone who's listening what we say, Chag kosher v'sameach. It should be a happy and kosher, right? All the food should be good, and wishing you a wonderful and happy Passover. And to those who are watching, remember we have Shabbat meals available on delivery. We have 2 great menus from Sova Catering and Sage Kitchen that a couple clicks away, you can have Shabbat delivered to your door. So make sure you avail yourself of those opportunities and buy one for a friend. That's a nice gift to do. Buy them a Shabbat dinner. Okay, and enjoy. Denis and Mark, thank you for joining us very, very much. We do hope to see you soon in person. That would be great. Okay, and make sure when this thing ends and you come to New York City, you come by and you say hello and you look us up, and we will definitely do the same when we get to the UK.
Got a deal.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the conversation. Joining. Chag Sameach. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Here we go now.